With Bernie Sanders coming out against open borders and Labour reaffirming their commitment to ending freedom of movement this week, you might well be wondering if, along with pastels and culottes, that socialism in one country is making a bit of a comeback. If you pay much attention to beefs on Twitter, you might be thinking that defending EU freedom of movement is incompatible with agitating for workers' rights against the exploitative capitalist class, is a betrayal of the Corbyn project, and effectively co-signs the EU's brutal enforcement of borders. Well, maybe not. Let's take a little preview at today's episode of Many Things Can Be True at Once. 1. Freedom of movement has been afforded to migrants who are generally coded as white and been defined against the restriction of such freedoms for migrants from the global south, often with deadly consequences. 2. Labour's line that freedom of movement will end after Brexit because the multilateral treaty which implements it will be replaced with shiny new bilateral ones is technically true. And 3. The end of freedom of movement will not usher in a new progressive and egalitarian migration system. A fleeting glance at the history of immigration controls in this country shows that making pathways to secure migration status does not happen with the interests of working class people's pay and conditions at heart. Take, for instance, the handling of the asylum issue during Blair's second administration, which saw the number of successfully granted asylum applications halve, while at the same time doubling the number of temporary working visas that were granted. That means that the number of people whose right to residence depended on specific employment conditions rose, at the same time that the number of people whose right to residence depended on humanitarian grounds fell. Answer me this. Who do you think is more exploitable as a worker? The person with indefinite leave to remain, or the person who's afraid to take a sick day in case they get sacked and they've got no access to the social safety net to fall back on and therefore they'd have to leave the country? Border controls which preserve the free movement of capital but not the free movement of people are inherently antagonistic with the aims of a workers' movement. All they do is immiserate the lives of migrants, force them into the unregulated grey economy, all while letting their bosses off the hook for where there are instances of localised and limited wage depression. Migrant workers at Uber, Deliveroo and McDonald's are leading the fight back against poverty pay and crap conditions. And if that's not the organised working class in action, I don't know what is. Labour's failure to push the dial on freedom of movement has frankly been shameful. The insurgent left has done best when they argue for the things that they really believe in and refuse the logic of there is no alternative. Let's be real, most people in the UK do not give a stuff about the precise institutional arrangements involved in Brexit. What it's really about is political values. Freedom of movement, the reciprocal right to live and work in the EU country of your choosing, is the thing that people actually quite like about access to the single market. What's more, Survation polling from last November showed that the majority of respondents thought that keeping freedom of movement would be the compromise that they could live with in order to get a good Brexit deal agreed with the EU. Labour's failure to move in this space that's wide open to them is bananas. Freedom of movement is far from perfect, but it is the bare minimum that we should be advocating for if we're serious about fighting for a more egalitarian and more just society. I want to see the Labour front bench make the arguments that I know they truly believe in. And I'm just going to say it like this. If you position migrants as an opposing force to the working class, colluding with elites to push down wages and drive down conditions, you're not a socialist. You just like your racism with a side portion of renationalised utilities.